In preparing for winter driving, there's one other thing you want to check, particularly you 123 and 126 owners, and that's the water drains up at the bottom of the windshield. Now on the 123 chassis, which we'll look at a little bit later, that's a terrible design, and if you don't pay attention to those water drains, you can have some major rust problems. Particularly if you're in a climate where it rains or where you park the car out under trees and it can get leaves and needles down in your engine compartment and intake air vent area. But I had a real surprise here on my 300 SDL. The other day I wanted to do some preventative maintenance on my wiper motor drive assembly, so I removed the air intake vent screen here and I looked down in here and there's standing water. Yeah, that's right. There's standing water right here in this corner, and you know, that's the type of thing that causes rust out. And when it happens, it'll drive you crazy, because when areas like this rust out, you'll have rainwater leaking into the car, and usually it goes all the way back to the rear carpets. And a lot of people think, oh man, you know, my door seals are leaking, or my sunroof's leaking, and they'll have all kinds of concerns. I knew one fella that literally, in his 126, he replaced all the seals in the car. He replaced the sunroof seals, he replaced the door seals, he replaced the front windshield, or he resealed it, but he replaced the rear window seal. And he was still getting water in the car at the rear carpets. And guess what it turned out to be? That's right. It had rusted out right here in this intake air box under the screen because the drain hole's plugged, and he was getting rainwater that was leaking down underneath the front carpets and going all the way to the back. So, owner beware, particularly if it's, I always do this every fall and here in the Pacific Northwest, because we get a lot of rain in the winter. So it's a real good time to take your old Benz and to inspect and clean out these front water drains. Now, on the 126 chassis, you've got a little bit of work to do, because you're going to have to remove these rubber seals and the clips to remove the screen, and then you can get in here. But go ahead, let's come on in close here and let me show you the problem and why this water is sitting in this well here. Here you can see the standing water. You know, it's about 3/8 of an inch thick. And if you look right up here in this area, you can see where the drain hole is. It's a large hole, but look at over half of the hole is plugged with this crud here. Now watch closely as I remove all this junk. Look at that, see that? It's gone. Look at those needles and junk. It's gone right down in to plug that hole. Now as I move those out of the way, look at that. There goes the water. So it's going to drain out. So I'll come in here and wipe this area out. I'll get my vacuum cleaner here and suck this out. Take a look at the other side over there on the passenger side. You can see that it's not plugged, but you can see the dirt and crud is well on its way to causing a problem there as well. So we'll get these all cleaned out. And by the way, if you have not seen my video on wiper arm drive assembly for the 126, be sure and see that. That's a very potential problem if you don't take care of it today. If you own a W123 chassis like this 1982 240D here, it's even more important that you check these front water drains on a regular basis. There's actually two drains on each side, or should I say two holes that route the water out of the this area of the fender, off the windshield, and out to the ground. Now, they're not located under the intake cabin air screens like you saw on the 126. Rather, they're located right underneath this hood hinge. Now, because of the location, you can have two very severe problems if these drains plug up and water is held in place over a long period of time. Number one, the hood hinge pivot point can rust up and it will literally break out of the body. And boy, if that ever happens, that's a huge problem to try to repair. Then, if it isn't this first hole that gets plugged and causes a hood hinge failure, down inside, even lower down in here, is the second hole, and if that plugs up, that can cause rust out in the body panel here, allowing water to leak into the passenger car compartment. And then, of course, it's going to end up back there on the rear carpets, making your rear carpets wet and fogging up the car every morning when you go to start it up and turn the heater on. So this is very important, you 123 owners. This is something you should check, probably check every 6 months if you live somewhere where there's a lot of rain. This car has sat outside, it's sat under trees, and if you look down in here, it's full of, little maple spinners, fir tree needles, and miscellaneous other stuff. And it's literally plugged the hole. And you know how I can tell? If I come out to a car, let's say it's not raining, but let's say it's rained sometime in the last few days, and if you open the hood and you still see wetness or dampness in this area, which I see right now with this one, then you know that that water is not draining properly. Of course, you can take a garden hose and you can sit here and run it into that well. You see all the water coming off the windshield here will leak down in here along this fender and then drop into this tunnel right below this hood hinge here. What I do is I use a very long screwdriver. Be careful not to scratch the paint when you do this. Just work in there. You can use compressed air, but a lot of times this is so plugged up that you're going to need to use a screwdriver to get in there and dig out a little bit of that crud to get that hole opened up. And then go ahead and use water and a brush and just get the water flowing through there. So let's get the camera in close here, and I'll try to, it's a little dark down in there, but I'll try to show you the problem and exactly where you want to do the clean out on these 123 chassis. The first water drain hole is located right underneath the bottom of this hood hinge. You can see right here, I'm going to scrape this down a little bit. You can see the leaves and needles in there. The second hole is located where the water goes through there and then goes down in along this panel, the body panel, and it's right in there. That one's kind of hard to get to. But just for a test, I'm going to pour water in here, and let's see if it holds water. Look at that. See that? Now you can see what happens when it's holding water like this. Look at the water is above the level of the hood hinge pin, and that's what will cause that pin to rust in and break off. So now I'm going to start digging in here a little bit, and as soon as I free up that hole, you'll see the water start, there she goes. Now the water should just drain right out of there. See that? But notice now all the water has drained into this area, and it's taking a long time to drain out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep using water, keep getting this to flow. I'll get in here and run the screwdriver down into that hole and keep rinsing water. You may have to get a vacuum and vacuum this out if it's really bad, and be sure and do both sides. And when you're done, don't forget to lubricate these hinges. You just saw a classic example of the primary water drain problem on a 123 chassis. But for you 123 owners, that's not the only thing you need to worry about. Let me explain. You see, when it rains, you have a lot of water coming off the windshield, you have a lot of water coming off the roof. It goes into this side gutter here, and it rolls down here, and that's where it goes into that trough located right below the hood hinge. But the water coming off the windshield, a lot of it will end up going through these cabin fresh air screens. And there is another set of drains in here. And if those drains become plugged, then you're going to have some real rust out problems. In fact, even if the drains don't plug, you can have problems. There's a lot of seam sealer that the factory used in there. And because these cars are so old, that seam sealer can dry and crack out, allowing water in this tunnel area here, which is located right below your wiper drive assembly, to start leaking water into the passenger compartment. Once again, this water will mysteriously show up under your front carpets, under the seats, and will collect on those rear carpet areas. So you might be fooled. You might say, where in the world is all this water coming from? If you've cleaned those front drains, you've removed the battery box, and inspected under the battery box. That's one of the key rust out areas on these 123s. It's primarily due to the fact that you have battery acid and water, the combination of the two, causing excessive corrosion into the battery tray. If you're sure your interior water drain problems are not related to the areas below the hood hinges, then you're going to have to remove those intake grill screens for further investigation. You may find some problems down in there. It'll become pretty obvious when you remove those screens. So what we did here on this 240D is we went ahead and used compressed air to get the final clean, to dry out the moisture, and then using a good spray lubricant, we went in there and lubricated the whole area, particularly the bottom of those hinge areas. Anytime you get around those hood hinges, you're working around them, always lubricate them. It doesn't even hurt to lubricate them every 3 months, because once again, if you lose them, you got a big problem. So this is another alert, and I highly recommend that you pay attention to your water drains.